He showed up at my door after midnight, shoulders hunched, eyes wide, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. What he told me in the kitchen, with the kettle sizzled behind me, changed everything I thought about my son. I never imagined a night like this, especially in this way, especially from him. Before we dive into this unexpected and emotional story, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. I love to know how far this little community stretches, and if you love stories that touch your heart, make you think, feel, and sometimes see yourself in them. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to Love and Tears. It helps more than you think. There's always another story waiting for you here. So here we go. It was just past 1:27 a.m. when I heard the car pull up to the yard. The sound of the gravel was familiar but unexpected. I was curled up on the sofa, wearing an old robe, half asleep, half awake, watching an old detective movie. I glanced at the clock. It's not 27. My first thought was that it might be a neighbor, maybe someone lost. Then there was a knock on the door. Not hurried, not panicked, just firm. I opened the door, and there he was, my son, Min. He stood under the porch light, his hands deep in his coat pockets, his black hair slightly damp from the drizzle. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me as if he were debating between speaking and turning away. Min, I called, half whispering, half asking. "Hello, Mom." His voice was low and soft. It had been 3 months or more since I'd seen him. He was always busy work-life things. He never talked about much. He called occasionally, but those calls always kept a polite distance. "Come in," I said, moving aside. He nodded and entered his shoulders, slightly hunched. I could smell the night on him, wet leaves, car exhaust, and something else I couldn't name. He looked tired, not just physically, but deep down. I led him into the kitchen, more out of habit than anything else. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the whole place was listening. I turned on the kettle for something to do. "Are you hungry?" He shook his head. "No, I just want to talk." That phrase, "just want to talk," was different from someone who was usually quiet. I nodded slowly and turned to look at him. The kitchen light was a little harsh, drawing long shadows under his eyes. He pulled out a chair and sat slowly, as if even sitting down was a decision. "Mom, I don't know how to say it," he began. There was a pause. I let it hang. Over the years, I've learned that people, especially those you love, need space to find their words. Rushing them only pushes the truth further away. "I've been carrying something around with me for a long time," he said, "and I don't know how to say it." My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to brace myself for bad news or reach across the table and take his hand. But I kept quiet, listening. Min looked up at me. "I've made a lot of choices I haven't told you. Some I'm proud of, some I'm still trying to understand." He bowed his head again, his fingers tracing the wood grain of the table. "But I didn't come here tonight to explain everything. I need to go home. I need to see you." I felt something shift in the room, soft but profound, like a door long closed had opened. "You're always welcome here," I said softly. "I know," he nodded. "I know. I just didn't know I needed it so much until recently." We were silent while the kettle began to steam. I poured 2 cups of chamomile tea, the kind he'd pretended not to like as a teenager, but always drank when no one was looking. He took a sip, then held the cup tightly in both hands. I saw his shoulders relax a little. "Do you remember when you were in high school?" he asked suddenly. "When you told your mother you were going on an overnight trip." I blinked. That was years ago, like 15. "Yes," I said, trying to remember. "Why I didn't go on that trip," he said. "I went to someone else's house." He looked up, waiting for a reaction. I saw the fear of judgment, the fear of disappointing my mother, written all over his face. But I wasn't angry. Maybe it was sad because he thought he couldn't tell me the truth then. "Youth, dear," I said softly. "Everyone has things they don't tell." He looked surprised, then relieved. It wasn't the only time, he continued. There were other things. "I'm not sure you'll understand. I'm not even sure I understand them all. You may not understand everything I said honestly, but that doesn't mean you won't try." He bowed his head and looked up. His eyes were wet now, the edges threatening to overflow. "I didn't come here to confess," he said. "I came looking for something. Maybe comfort, maybe courage. I don't know." I reached out and touched his hand. It was warm and he didn't pull away. "You've come to the right place," I said. And for the first time in years, he smiled a small smile. Not a big one, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, the kind you had to look for. Outside, the rain poured harder, tapping the windows, like soft fingertips. Inside, something shifted. What had been stuck between us for so long began to shift. He took another sip of tea and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "There's more I want to say," he whispered. "I'm here," I replied, and I meant it. He stayed the night, not in his old room, now filled with cardboard boxes, old photo albums, winter coats, things I hadn't sorted out in ages, but on the sofa, wrapped in a patchwork blanket my grandmother had sewn when she was still alive. I don't think either of us expected him to stay, but when I got up to go to bed, he was quiet, just looked at me and asked, "Do you mind if I sleep here tonight?" Sleep was a word he used when he was younger, when he came home late from college or a trip with friends. Hearing it again made my heart flutter strangely. A flutter only a mother's heart could understand, happy, worried, and reminiscent. The house passed quietly through the night, as it always had. The wind blew through the trees outside, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only real sound. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what he hadn't said, wondering what had finally brought him back. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen again, awake. He leaned against the counter, clutching a fresh cup of coffee, looking out the window, as if searching for something among the leaves. "Morning," I greeted, tightening my robe around him. He turned and smiled slightly. "Morning." I walked back to the kitchen to prepare dinner, my habit, when my emotions were too intense. I cooked. The sound of eggs sizzling in the pan had a way of making things more real. We didn't say much until we sat down to eat. I made scrambled eggs, toast, and some frozen sausages I found in the cupboard. He'd loved it as a kid. I'm not sure if he still does, but he cleaned the plate, a small victory for me. When he spoke again, his voice was slow, thoughtful. Last year was tough. I stayed silent, still buttering my toast, waiting for him to continue. I lost something he said. Not in a death sense, but something close, something almost lost. I looked up. "A relationship?" I asked. He nodded. There was a heaviness in the way he said it, not simply broken, but as if he were mourning a future he had believed would come. "She was important to me," he said, then paused. And we meant something to each other. But it didn't work out. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who was she? What happened? Why didn't he tell Mom before? But something told me he hadn't come back to face the question. He had come back for safety, for shelter. We tried to build, he said, for a while, but eventually it slipped away like sand. He looked at me now not like a son looking to his mother, but like a man looking to someone who had experienced it, hoping for some understanding. Do you ever feel that way? He asked. Like holding something beautiful, fragile, that no matter how much you care for it, it will break. The room was silent. I looked at my hands, the grooves deeper than before. I thought of his father, thought of our years, the good, the hard, and the gentle drift that had pulled us apart. Yes, I whispered. You do? He nodded as if he understood, though I didn't have to say much. It makes me question myself, he continued, about what I give and expect. He pushed his empty plate forward, leaned back in his chair. I poured him more coffee. The strange thing about life is it never ends, I said. It's always changing. You change. And sometimes you only know it when something's broken. He looked down at his cup. I didn't come back to be fixed, he said. I came back because I was lost. And this is where I thought I could find a piece of myself. His words fell not with poetry, but with a raw honesty that men often hide. You're always welcome home, I said. No matter where you've been, no matter what you've been through. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes fixed on a spot out the window. Maybe a memory, maybe a part of himself he'd never faced. That afternoon, we went for a walk. The leaves were starting to turn yellow with patches of rust and deep orange. The air had a crisp, cold taste that made your skin crawl, making you pull down your sleeves and breathe a little deeper. When I was little, he used to walk with me, kicking acorns on the sidewalk and asking questions. Now he walked slowly beside me, hands in his pockets, each step thoughtful. Do you think people change? He asked suddenly. I turned to look at him. Of course, we change all the time, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. He nodded, then fell silent. We walked in silence for a while, until we reached the old park bench. Sitting down, he said after a while, I used to be afraid I would be like you. His words weren't sarcastic. They weren't hurtful, on the contrary. There was something real and familiar. I used to think you sacrificed too much. He continued, your time, your dreams, your energy for me, for Dad, for everyone. I looked at him, not knowing how to respond. Then he added, but now I see that maybe you only know what's important. The wind rustled through the branches, carrying a few dry leaves across the grass. You don't always understand, I said, but you try. That's all we can do. He looked at me. I'm starting to understand it. We sat for a while. The sun dipped behind the trees, tinting the sky pale pink and yellow. Back home, he went to the living room bookshelf and pulled out an old notebook. I hadn't even realized he'd left it there. He flipped through a few pages and looked up. There's more I want to tell you, he said. I nodded. Listen? And I listened, not only to the words, but to the person behind them, the boy I raised, the man he'd become, and the space in between where the healing had begun. That evening after dinner, we sat in the living room with a different, quiet lighter, more open. Min opened the notebook and read small paragraphs, his voice quiet, as if he was sharing a secret he had just found the courage to tell. The writing was familiar, a younger version of him, but each line carried a weight that only time could give. I listened without pausing, letting the room fill with his voice and the stories in ink. Stories of hopes and struggles, dreams he never spoke of, fears he buried deep even to himself. I saw the man struggling between past and future, the boy who tried to understand a world that was sometimes cold and indifferent. There was a passage he wrote about feeling invisible, not just to others but to himself, like he was passing through his life like a shadow. He read softly, not touching anything, as if he had never really been seen. His voice was a little hoarse, and I sensed the pain behind the words, the loneliness no one wanted to admit. I took his hand, a simple but firm gesture. "I've never not seen you," I said. "You have always been the brightest part of my life, even though you could not see me." He held my hand, a small but meaningful connection. In that moment, it felt like the years between us had shrunk. As the night deepened, Min shared more, not just from the notebook, but from his heart. He talked about the pressure of expectations, the fear of failure, the burden of being someone he wasn't sure he wanted to be. He realized he had pushed his mother away, thinking it would be easier to face life alone. "I thought if I kept you away, I wouldn't disappoint you," he said. But I only disappointed myself. The honesty in his voice choked me. I wanted to say that disappointment was part of love, that stumbling, falling, not knowing everything was normal. But sometimes silence was the best gift, giving each other space to heal. We talked about forgiveness, not just for each other, but for ourselves, about the difficulty of accepting mistakes, letting go of the guilt that clings like a shadow. I told him about my own failures, the times when I was too proud or too afraid to reach out as a mother. It was a moment of true connection, two souls meeting across the distance that years and distance had carved. When it was time to say goodnight, I led him back to his old room, a room filled with childhood mementos, now tinged with tender memories. He looked around, touched the faded posters, smiled with sweet nostalgia. "Thank you for letting me come home, Mom," he said softly. "Thank you for letting me stay here," I replied. Closing the door behind me, a quiet hope touched my chest, softly but real. That kind of hope that comes from daring to be vulnerable makes us find each other again. Not perfect, but real. The house was still quiet, but alive in a new way. That night carried promises not yet clearly seen, only the feeling of a journey just beginning. The following days felt like passing through a dawn that was slowly breaking. Every moment with Min was quiet, but filled with a different energy, built on sincerity, understanding, and the fragile trust that grew between mother and son, day by day. Not that everything suddenly became perfect. Life doesn't work that way. But now there was a softness, a willingness to listen and be listened to. One afternoon, mother and son sat on the back porch, the air chilly in early autumn. The sky was pale, a few wisps of cloud drifting. I watched Min use his fingertips to scrape the edge of a leaf, his gaze thoughtful. He broke the comfortable silence I've been thinking for a long time, that I had to have all the answers before I could come back. But it seems like the answers don't come first. Sometimes they come after you dare to ask the questions. I smiled. "That sounds like wisdom." He chuckled. "I don't feel wise. I'm just learning." "Don't we all?" I asked. He nodded. I'm learning to be less hard on myself, to accept that it's okay not to know everything. There was a peace in his voice that I hadn't heard before, the quiet strength of someone who had faced his fears and kept going. Over the next few weeks, we talked more than we had in years about dreams, postponed, hopes, rekindled mistakes, and lessons learned. He shared bits of his life, his struggles in relationships, his challenges at work, his moments of joy and sadness. I told him my own stories too, things I hadn't said in a long time. About the loneliness after Dad left, about staying up all night, wondering if I had done enough, about how I tried to hold on to my family, even though sometimes it felt like everything was slipping away. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, the sky tinged amber and pink. Min looked at me with a steady gaze. "Thank you, Mom, for not letting me go," he said. I took his hand. "I know you never will." We sat in silence, a silence that needed no words, just presence. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how much could change in such a short time. One late night, one knock on the door could open the way back for two people. Vulnerability, when met with love and patience, can heal wounds that seemed permanent. Min's visit reminded me that family is more than a shared history. It's about choosing to be there for each other when times are tough. It's about letting the people you love be who they are, messy, imperfect, and lovable. I don't know where the future will take us, but one thing is for sure: sometimes the hardest journeys are the ones that lead us home. And sometimes coming home is finding ourselves along the way. Thank you for listening to our story. If you found something meaningful in this story, please consider liking and subscribing to Love and Tears. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment that changed everything with someone you love? Tell me in the comments. Until next time, take care of yourself and your loved ones.